to tune up our antennas, to listen to the fact that Torah comes in at least Shivim Panim, and to understand that the Torah we have to offer is a Torah that Jews are hungry for. Chazak v'emetz. Thank you.
So Sid really wanted to have time for us to dialogue with him. So we have some microphones that people are going to make available to folks who are who want to ask questions. And please, we've done this drill a number of times, and I really want to ask you to think carefully. We've had so much wonderful stimulation, so much to think about, and it raises so many important questions. So please, let's try to keep discern whether you have a question to ask rather than a teaching to offer. And please, let's try to keep the question. I think a good measurement is keeping the question within, a sentence or two. It's a good thought. So, Daniel.
We can't quite figure out how to turn this on. Who knows how to turn this on?
Does it take take a cord?
No, it's wireless.
Oh, just speak loud.
Oh, there we go.
It's on.
It's
It's
already
on.
You did it. I couldn't do it.
I haven't said anything yet. Thank you, Sid. I would like to, I first of all, Dan, I'm sorry, but I think that for the reasons I'm going to say in a moment, to phrase it only in terms of question is not fair. Let me say why, Sid. There's one, I do want to suggest, by the way, another piece of required reading, which is Nate Silver's book, Signal and Noise, in which he holds people who project the future accountable and shows how to hold them accountable. I think it's a good idea, but I like your projections of the future. Here's what I want to suggest. You were preaching to the converted. And instead of saying, this is what should happen, could I propose, suggest, ask that we consider the question, how can this community, which has grown as it has grown, in spite of the opposition of that organized Jewish community over the last 25 and 30 years, how can we be enlisted to support the work that you're talking about? And I will share with you some other things by email in a little while. But I'll leave it at that. I think that that would be an interesting way to reframe, because all the things that you're saying are things that we are already doing. We are wrestling with how to remain open, not because we're moving in a denominational line, but because so many people want to be with us, including Reform rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, Reconstructionist rabbis, conservative rabbis, who have joined Ohala, who have put in their lot with this movement, because we are doing exactly the things that you're talking about. Kehillah Community Synagogue has existed for a long time as a social justice, exciting, committed community, which is not on the radar screen. So I would like to ask you, how can that happen? How can the energy of this community be enlisted in support of the very wonderful things, really and truly wonderful things that you're saying?
So Dan, I would, look, I think each and every person in each of the communities where they work, or live, or worship, pray, and act, need to judge the extent to which they are successful, thriving, sacred communities or not. I'm in no position to make that judgment. My guess is you have a spectrum here of communities that have been around for a long time, that have really gotten it right, and those that have struggled, those that are having a hard time with sustainability. I think, by the way, and I've heard echoes of that in these rooms over the course of the weekend, it is too easy, too facile to dismiss the fact that, we don't have money, but we do great things, okay? Kind of ask Taco's question about the Kemach and the Torah, okay? If you've got something that's so great, how come you can't make it sustainable? You gotta look yourself in the mirror and ask that question in hard, honest ways, okay? And again, I'm making no judgments here. My guess is that in this range of communities, you've got those that are thriving and those that are struggling. But with that said, I think there's a lot of what you said that's true, Daniel. I think that many of the things that are happening in rural communities for 30 years have elements of the paradigm I put out, the 4 principles. If not all 4, at least 1, 2, or 3 is definitely true. And some of the work that I'm doing right now, as a result of Jewish megatrends, is that I'm being invited to communities where I actually broker meetings between people who continue to hold power and money and influence in communities, and folks who are at the margins of the community who are doing amazing things which continue to be under-resourced, under-recognized, and oftentimes marginalized. That's happening not only in the religious sector, but it's happening equally in the political sector. And people here know what that's all about. And as I go into communities, again, I've partly because the way I decided to play my hand in my career, I've got access to places where people, Federation will bring me in, and they know that they're not reaching the next generation. And part of what the book has done is to get people to say, okay, how do we access this next generation? And what I insist on doing when I go to communities is that I want to have meetings where in the room, I've got people who are on the margins around issues of learning, around issues of politics, around issues of Israel, around issues of spirituality, around issues of sacred community. In every one of those sectors that I talk about in Jewish megatrends, there are people on the margins doing amazing things who are actually attracting next-gen Jews. And what I say to the Federation leadership is to say, I don't want you to bring them into the room to have them come groveling with a grant proposal, and then you give them $5,000 or $10,000, and they say, thank you, Massa, and they run back and try and write a good grant report 6 months later so they get a renewal. That's the relationship that exists. That's not a partnership. That's not a covenant. So when I say to these federations, I said, you don't need them as grantees to put on the cover of your annual report to say we're serving young people. Get past that. You need them at the table because they know things that you don't know. They have experiences that you haven't had. They know how to tune into the wavelengths of next-gen Jews that you can't even imagine. You need them as much as they need you. But it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways. Because when I speak only to the folks who feel themselves or actually are on the margins, I actually ask the question to say, to what extent are you celebrating the fact that you're marginal? And you get some kind of energy from being marginalized, and to what extent do you want to take responsibility to access the mainstream and not just the margin? Because if you think you have Torah that can reach the next generation of Jews, take yourself seriously. Step up to the plate. So there's a lot of work that has to be done reaching from both sides to each other. Because I think that there's, the ingredients are there, but the cake is still falling flat. So we've got to find a way to mix it together in a little healthier way. So I take what you said, Daniel, very seriously. Okay? I think there's a lot that the mainstream community, the mainstream synagogue can learn from what's happened in Jewish renewal. Okay? But I think there's got to be some coming together from both directions, not just one side.
On that side. On the other side. Yeah, there, good.
Go, Mark.
Go, Mark.
Thank you so much. I speak as one of those conservative rabbis who is a full member of Ohala, and I'm really curious about when you talk about the silos of denominations and the silos even of the Jewish religion as a whole, whether you have really seen in all of your incredible research and work, whether you've seen successful collaborative models that can really transcend those barriers and create intentional spiritual communities across, like models where really there is a community where people may share a sense of intentional spiritual community, but have multiple ways of davening, including a Mechitza minyan here, and a renewal minyan here, and a traditional egalitarian minyan here, and whether that is something, because it's something that I quite passionately believe with, and in our own sort of post-flood traumatic Boulder community, I think it's probably a model that we need to move to in Boulder. And I just wonder if you have any guidance and experience in that area.
Look, we're in this an odd period of time right now. The denominations that are out there are not going away. And yet, to most Jews, they're not relevant. I mean, they're not even relevant to, I used the example before of a dozen or 50, maybe 25 or so leading Reform rabbis around the country who said the URJ, you don't meet our needs. If they're not even meeting the needs of those rabbis, Allah HaKam v'kama, they don't have to meet the needs of Jews. Jews are not asking denominational questions. And actually, in my own experience, as I was growing at Dad Shalom, I learned to tone down my Reconstructionist party talk enough to bring people in who didn't want to hear a denominational rap. Okay? Because in the end, they wanted the same thing, but unless I could get out from under that umbrella of, each of our movements and denominations give us a certain lingo. And so we learn how to kind of say that lingo, and we are in an echo chamber where we all kind of say to each other, say, that's the Torah truth, okay? And until I kind of got out of that, I wasn't able to kind of reach a wider cross-section of Jews in our community that were open to what we were doing at Adat Shalom. So this odd issue about, you frame the question about, are there ways for the denomination to cooperate? It's not going to happen on the national level. I mean, Rick Jacobs is not going to sit down with Steve Warnock and say, let's create, collaborative reform conservative congregations. That's not going to happen, okay? Nor should we wait for it to happen. The Messiah will come first. But I think that on the local grassroots level, because Jews don't care about denominational labels, I think that there are expressions of community that are happening around the country that are without those labels, okay? Kavanah Cooperative doesn't have a denominational label. Rome doesn't have a denominational label. I don't know what, maybe Dave can speak to that a little bit.
Renewal's not a denomination, so.
Yes, that's an interesting issue, okay? It's what I alluded to earlier, and that is the fact, in other words, is renewal the non-denomination denomination or not? No, I think, it's an interesting question. It seems to me, again, I make this observation as a student of American Jewish life, okay? And I don't intend any offense here, so people take it the wrong way, please forgive me. I'm just trying to make an observation. I assume there's a reason you invited some people who are outsiders to get some perspective on what you're doing and the road you're going down, okay? I can only speak the truth as I see it. It seems to me that you're in a stage as a Jewish renewal movement where you can't quite figure out what you want to be. When it serves your purposes to be the non-denomination denomination, you use that language. But gradually you're acquiring all the accoutrements of the denomination, which you need to do to become sustainable. Now that's a quandary that's really difficult. I don't have an answer for it, okay? But you're in this, strange stage of your lives. So I do think around the country there are communities that are trying not to have any denominational labels, including Jewish renewal, okay, that are meeting with success. I think the sustainability question is one that I always ask. And I think that's where I think so many great experiments, not just in the religious, spiritual realm, but in the political realm as well, and the Jewish learning realm as well, have not really kind of figured it out. And I think that's where I think there's still a lot to be learned.
Question over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Deborah Bryn. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I think cultural context is important. There are several people here that live in the Southwest and serve in the Southwest. I grew up in Minnesota, and that has its own Jewish culture. I dipped into the East Coast culture of which you referred with the synagogue movement when I went to rabbinical school at RSC. Not my culture of origin, and now I'm in the Southwest, which is a completely different culture. And I have a question because I'm not, unlike you, I'm not a macro thinker. I'm a micro thinker. I always want to know, where am I supposed to park the car after I've taken the journey? What do I do to get rid of the car so I can get back on my feet? So my question comes partly out of my context in Albuquerque, where there's a lot of B'nai Anusim, a lot of people returning from the inquisitional histories, and they've really popped open my consciousness. The question is, how do you move from the other direction that you spoke of, from being the antenna to the broadcast mode, in response to my context in my synagogue, where I followed the founding charismatic rabbi? I went into antenna mode, not broadcast mode, and now what I'm hearing you urge is that we be in a focused, clear, meaningful broadcast mode after listening for a while. How do you do that and avoid the pitfalls that come with the charismatic leader?
First of all, I just got, the hump was from your last phrase. I don't think charismatic leader is bad. Nothing I said was taken to mean that, okay? You kind of ended that way, Deborah. I don't know whether you believe that is or not. In other words, I think if you've got charisma, use it. If you don't have it, try to acquire it. But I actually, seriously, I've done one of the, to a slight tangent here, and then I'll come back to your question. One of the most regular comments I got after Finance Bergeron came out was people would say to me after I would present and the book came out, they said, well, you profiled 4 synagogues with charismatic rabbis. Can you make that transition from synagogue center to what I call synagogue community, or intentional spiritual community, with something other than a charismatic superstar rabbi? And I took the critique very seriously, okay? I'm not sure how conscious I was of that or not. I was desperate to find models that kind of worked for me in terms of the writing. And I got some grant money about a year after the book came out to work with 3 congregations in the Washington area to actually do a 2-year project to move them from synagogue center to synagogue community paradigm. And specifically, though I didn't say this in the profile of the request for proposal that went out, the RFPs, we had about a dozen synagogues apply. We chose 3, and I was looking for synagogues that had certain characteristics. I didn't want synagogues that were in crisis. I wanted them to have some stability. I wanted them to have been around for at least 50 years, so there's some extant organizational culture. And I wanted rabbis who were solid, but were not superstars. I just wanted solid rabbinic professionals, okay? And we did the work and had some amazing results, because I needed to prove to myself that what I was describing was not simply in the rarefied province of what a, one rabbi a generation exists to do this, okay? That's not a plan for an overarching Jewish community. You need to have a plan that can be replicable, okay? So now back to your question. I think that the broadcast antenna metaphor that I'm trying to put out is a constant yin and yang. It's constantly back and forth, okay? What I'm worried about is not the charisma. I'm worried about the rabbi who's tone deaf. I'm worried about the rabbi who has no antenna mode. This is a true story. You'll think I'm making it up, but I'm not. I once gave a talk around my idea about new communities. And I talked about the extent that communities are really sacred, intentional communities, or communities that know how to hold people in their brokenness. I talked about the kind of people who, in our community, came broken in spirit and in body and in family and in career, and were diminished souls, okay? And I talked about how a community that really works can work to hold them and bring them to some kind of shleimut. And I had a rabbi of a major congregation in an affluent suburb who said, I'm not sure what you've said is relevant. We don't have those kind of people here. Now,
You don't hear any of us say that.
I understand it, but like, so what's that about? Is that true? He was speaking his truth. This is a rabbi who was totally tone deaf. He was, in other words, because I gave a sermon years ago that was called Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. Okay? With attribution to Ben Franklin, right? I say, we have created communities that force Jews into making believe that they are healthy, wealthy, and wise. And if you don't have money, and if you're not with a PhD from an Ivy League college, and you're not in full spiritual and mental health, you learn to fake it. Or you become invisible. And that is a symptom of the failure of the synagogue center. So this rabbi was simply a rabbi of that kind of community, where he made all the people who weren't healthy, healthy, wealthy, or wise, become invisible. So I think if you're constantly trying to listen for that, you're not going to fall into the trap of becoming tone deaf, okay? So don't worry about the charisma, worry about being tone deaf.
So we just want to notice that we have a lot of people on each side that are lining up, which is amazing. So we want to be able to get all the questions out. So let's just be discern for yourself whether you need to really be asking, because I'm just really afraid we're not going to get to everybody. So, there.
I ask. My question is about the choosing between bringing people through the door through the secular or through the sacred. Because I think the strength of my community, like many smaller town communities, is in that sacred sense of community that does transform some lives, some to a greater extent, some to a lesser extent. But to bring people into the door, certainly my board, my leadership feels we need to be doing more to outreach to the so-called secular people by doing more cultural events, more things that are not religion, but maybe social justice things in a way to attract people, you know? And I'm a graduate of Star Peer and Star Good to Great, and Star, of course, has Cineplex, which is having all kinds of events going on, not necessarily those holy religious wisdom and so on, to get people in your door. And I want to know, how do we get people into the tent like that? I've seen Orhat Torah, Rabbi Mordecai Finley's model in Los Angeles, where they're side by side, there's the sacred community in the coffee shop. Is that the way to go? If I've got something really, I think that's wonderful, but how do we extend to those Jews who aren't coming through the door?
Right. I love the question. And by the way, Julie's mom was a member of Adal Shalom for a brief time, all too brief. So it's great to see you, Julie. Great to have you here. I love the question because I actually think that this goes back to the point I made last night about the Shigim Panim Torah. And by the way, the Pew study also underscores this whole issue. I think that we have to be ready to deliver sacred community in more ways than just tefillah. I really do. There are people who will kind of like, can relate and respond to what you do in the context of whatever you call Shachrit Mincha Marav, whatever it's going to be, okay, and how you deliver that, okay? But there's some people who will never access it that way. And I actually made this proposal at the United Synagogue Convention, which I think later wrote up, where I proposed a form of Cineplex, where I said, I would like to suggest that every rabbi in every congregation be off the bima once a month. And on that one time a month, the rabbi should be asked to teach something that relates to her or his passion. In some other place besides what's happening in the main service. Let other people lead the service. Frankly, interesting things may happen if other people lead the service, the main service, whatever it is. But let the rabbi do something that they're passionate about. You know how many rabbis I work with who tell me that they're not working in their passion zone? When that happens, you get mediocrity. You get mediocre spiritual leadership, okay? And you also know that in most synagogues, you have a minority of people who are regular shul goers, okay? Even in our own community that's been blessed from the earliest days with about as high a per capita attendance at Shabbos morning of almost any synagogue, at least in our area, okay? Non-Orthodox, whatever else. Still there, a majority of our members are not regular Shabbos goers. But when we do what we call Shabbat Breirot a few times a year, which is our version of Cineplex, okay? And we have 4 or 5 things happening in 2 or 3 periods of time concurrent with the Shabbat service, we double and triple our numbers of that Shabbat morning. People come because sacred community doesn't only happen, in the context of a liturgical experience. So I'm a big fan of that, and I think the Synagogue of the Future has got to really explore that with much greater gusto.
But is that not a center? That's what my board wants to call being the Jewish community center of Chico as well. And then
Okay,
seems
but
like a
this,
bad word.
here's why it's not that.
Okay.
Because I don't want happening there a coffee bar. I'm not interested in having a coffee bar happening concurrent with the service. I'm interested in having people, studying Parshat Shavua, studying modern Hebrew poetry, talking about the future of the state of Israel, talking about issues of healing, talking about issues of aging and infirm parents and how to care for them. These are all issues of what sacred communities should be engaged in. People are yearning for this kind of stuff. And if you look at the success of mega churches, what they understood really well, which we still have not gotten, is that they took the place that kept people up at night, where people were in pain, where people were in need, and they essentially made them into ministries. They have the language for it. We don't even have a language for it, okay? We want to call it a committee. Want to go to a committee? No, thank you. I'm busy, okay? Do you want to be part of the ministry of families who have children with learning disabilities? Do you want to be part of the ministry of families who are dealing with aging and infirm parents? Do you want to be part of the ministry of people who are looking how to create lives that are ecologically sustainable and how to do that? I can go on and list of a dozen and more areas about how we create lives of sacred purpose. That's my fourth pillar of Kedusha. And it's not only about liturgical space. So that's what I want to see happening in synagogue communities.
Great, thank you. So, okay, over here.
Thank you. Yosef Grotsky from a place called Jupiter in Florida. It seems to me the essential question should be for all of us, are we Jews for Jews or are we Jews for God? If we look at it that way, there are two distinct roads. As Jews for Jews, many of us find ourselves in mind chasing mind, somewhere stuck between Asiya and Bria. As Jews for God, we're searching in the world of Atzilut and should be asking the essential question of who am I? And as Moshe would have said, Mi Anochi. Mi Anochi. Because we can't truly...
I'm sorry, so the question is? Yes.
Well, okay, I'm getting there. Okay.
I know.
Okay. So I'm asking Sid, how do we get clear about that? How do we find a direction in that? And is that relevant in the world that we are operating in today?
Thank you.
Maybe I didn't understand your question well enough. If I thought I had something valuable or cogent to say, I'd respond. I really don't understand it well enough. Maybe we can talk more afterwards. Okay?
Great.
Lori Klein from Central California, Allah's ordained rabbi. Thank you, Sid. This has been really instructive. Can you give an example of a community falling forward and also talk a bit about how we can create communities in this context that we're in of a sense of financial scarcity where failure doesn't freak us out so that we can fail forward? Thank you.
I may take the field on two in a row because I'm trying to think of a really good example of failing forward. Look, I'm going to follow up on what I said to Julie on this level, okay? Because I know some rabbis who have tried to do models of the Cineplex model, okay? And they've met with a lot of resistance, okay? And you can imagine what the resistance is, okay? There are, people in the governance structure of the synagogue, leadership, board member, president, whatever else, who has a very conventional view of the box in which they want to keep their rabbi. And the extent to which you want to step out of that box will be sanctioned. If not explicitly, then implicitly. Depends on the relationship, okay? So whatever you do that's going to take you out of the conventional job profile that you kind of signed on the dotted line for when you took the job, okay, is going to be met with pushback. And so what you need to do is not ram it down their throats, because that's going to fail, okay? You need to start engaging in an education process about why this is necessary. I do, one thing that I've done which has actually had a lot of positive benefit in congregations, I do an exercise with boards, where I have the rabbi make a list of the 10 areas of functioning that take the most time, and then to rank it in order of where most of the time goes. Okay, from 1, the most time consuming, to 10, the least. There's some things that don't make it on the list, but 10 seems to be a good number. It's been used before. And then I asked the rabbi to do a